The old logging trail twisted deep into the valley, winding its way between thick stands of pine and fir. Sam White gripped the steering wheel tight, navigating their truck through the narrow dirt path. "Are we almost there?" asked Melissa from the passenger seat, peering out at the dense greenery creeping in on either side. "According to the map, our campsite should be just up ahead," Sam replied, slowing as the path narrowed further. After a few more turns, the trees finally fell away to reveal a small grassy clearing beside a bubbling brook. Sam pulled the truck to a stop and cut the engine with an air of relief. "Well, here we are," he said, glancing over at Melissa with a smile. "What do you think?" She opened her door and stepped out, taking in their secluded forest paradise bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. "It's beautiful. Nice and quiet. Just what we needed." With the trunk popped, they began unloading their camping supplies. Within the hour, their tent was pitched near the water's edge and a fire crackled merrily, cooking strips of venison for their dinner. As night fell, they sat by the fire sharing stories and gazing at the brilliant star-filled sky visible away from city light pollution. An owl hooted somewhere unseen, and the woods rose to life with the rustlings and calls of nocturnal creatures awakening all around them. "It's so peaceful out here," Melissa sighed contentedly. But not long after, as they prepared for bed, a strange sound drifted through the dark forest. A long, low howl rose and fell hauntingly close by. Sam and Melissa exchanged an uneasy look across the dying fire. "What was that?" she murmured, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. "Sounded like a wolf, maybe a coyote," Sam replied, though without conviction. There weren't supposed to be wolves in these parts. In their tent, listening to the mysterious sounds continue, neither could escape a riding unease they couldn't quite place. Sleep came fitfully that night as the woods whispered all around in the blackness. When dawn's light finally filtered into their shelter, Sam unzipped the tent flap and crawled out. What he saw made him freeze in his tracks. Over by their supplies, the remnants of their food lay scattered, wrappers torn open, and crumbs strewn about. Something had been rummaging around in the night. "Melissa, get out here," Sam said in a low voice, and the worry in his tone had her hurrying to his side. She gasped at the mess. "A bear, you think?" Melissa asked, scanning the nearby brush apprehensively. Sam didn't respond, only continued scanning the area with a deepening frown. It wasn't much of a mess for a hungry bear, and there were no tracks, only the strange feeling they were being watched even now, from somewhere in the shadowy depths of the surrounding forest. As they cleaned up in tense silence, doubts lingered that it had been mere wildlife intruding after all. An ominous sense of unseen eyes upon them persisted for the rest of an uncomfortable morning, with an unspoken question hovering heavy between them. What exactly was lurking out there in the dense trees? The day dragged with no resolution to ease their unease. By late afternoon, Sam insisted they pack up early to leave under the looming clouds of an impending storm. They worked in hurried silence, shooting furtive glances into the encroaching foliage as dusk swiftly fell. Finally loaded and with rain spitting from the darkening sky, Sam started the truck and gunned the engine. But as they began pulling away, Melissa cried out suddenly. Through the downpour, she pointed at a dim figure standing statue, still among the skeletal trees at the tree line, hooded and featureless, merely observing them from the shadows. Sam slammed on the brakes and swerved to a stop, his own heart seizing in fright at the apparition. But when a flash of lightning briefly lit the woods, the specter was gone, as if it had never been. He threw the truck into gear and peeled out, dirt spraying as they fishtailed down the treacherous path, disappearing into the stormy night, both shaking with adrenaline and fear of what exactly had been watching them. The next morning found them huddled in their motel room. After a mostly sleepless night, clinging to each cup of weak coffee as the rain still lashed the windows. Finally, Sam broke the tense silence. "We should see if anyone in town knows anything about that place," he said gravely. "I've got a bad feeling about this." Melissa nodded hesitantly, and soon they were walking down the main street of the tiny mountain village, seeking answers. But the locals were a close-mouthed bunch, doors shutting quickly until one man took pity on their obvious distress. "Best be careful up in Carver's Valley," the grizzled old-timer warned over his newspaper. "That land's been cursed ever since old man Carver disappeared up there 20 years ago. Folks say his spirit still haunts the woods looking for victims. I wouldn't set foot there again if I was you." A haunted valley and a missing hermit. It certainly explained a few things, but one question still nagged at Sam's mind. Any disappearances since then? The man eyed them cautiously. "Folks go missing up there from time to time, sure enough, but the sheriff, he says it's probably bears or such. Personally, I ain't so sure." He lowered his voice. "You ask me. Carver's still up there, and he ain't alone neither. Mark my words, you leave evil be. It'll come drifting down from those woods one day." A chill crept up Sam's spine at the ominous warning, but Melissa was already pulling him away, eyes bright with an intuition he knew all too well. "We need to go back," she declared with resolve. "Tonight." He sighed, knowing full well there would be no dissuading her now. Whatever was haunting those woods had drawn her in like a moth to flame with her insatiable curiosity, and he'd do anything to keep her safe. Even delve back into the heart of darkness with her. That evening found their truck bumping its way back up the old logging trail under a waning crescent moon. They parked at the edge and slipped silently into the dense woods with only small flashlights to ward off the inky blackness pressing in from all sides. For over an hour, they stealthily worked their way through the forest, following vague trails and keeping alert for any signs of life in the otherwise still primeval wood. Just as Melissa was beginning to lose hope, her light fell upon something jutting incongruously among the foliage, the splintered remains of wooden stairs leading up into the trees. With bated breath, they ascended until emerging onto a small clearing. At its center stood an ancient, ramshackle cabin, windows dark and grimy, the whole structure leaning tiredly to one side, as if under the weight of untold secrets within. This, then, was the sinister Carver's decrepit abode. And something told them answers would be found within, for better or worse. Grasping hands, Sam and Melissa steeled their nerves and began stealthily searching for a way inside. The door creaked open reluctantly to reveal the musty cabin interior, shadows flickering in their flashlight beams. Despite the late hour, no candles or lamps glowed within. Only a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, hinting at long abandonment. Stepping carefully over the warped floorboards, Sam and Melissa fanned out to investigate. Everything was coated in a fine grit, from the rusting pots and pans to the spiderwebbed windows shielding a panorama view of the silent valley below. In one crumbling armchair was a yellowed newspaper, its date April 12th, 1953, staring out at them from ages past. As Melissa brushed off more grime, a grainy photo stared back. An austere, wispy-haired man identified as Bartholomew Carver, resident hermit, declared missing without a trace the previous February after failing to make his annual supply run. "How strange," Melissa murmured, brushing dust from her hands. The man who lived here simply vanishing without explanation. Sam pondered the article's implications as he searched the lean, to addition attached to the cabin's rear, finding only moth-eaten furs and farming tools crumbling with rust. His thoughts were interrupted by Melissa's call from the lone bedroom. There, tucked within the sagging mattress, was a small moleskin journal, its pages swollen and faded. Melissa attempted opening it carefully, but many sheets crumbled at her touch, revealing sketchy, spidery scrawl chronicling Carver's strange life in these very woods over 3 decades prior. November 8th, 1920. 2. A most peculiar sighting in the forest glade tonight. The others stir, but remain shrouded. I feel their hunger and long for the coming convergence. January 2nd, 1923. Another livestock butchered on the South Ridge. The tracks lead here as I knew they would. I've invited them inside at last, and soon we shall feast together. February 19th, 1930. 8. They whisper of the girl in emerald who wanders too far from the road. Her sweet song shall call the others, and in the pooling glade their hunger shall be sated. The entries grew steadily more disturbing and nonsensical. Melissa snapped the book shut involuntarily, shivering at its implications. Had Carver truly gone mad in isolation? Or were there more sinister forces at work in this accursed valley? As they departed the ramshackle abode under waning moonlight, Melissa noticed the sleek furrows of enormous paw prints in the damp soil, far too large to be any natural creature. Her blood ran cold at this final confirmation that something unnatural indeed lurked within these shadowy depths. Whatever Carver had first encountered in the forest so long ago had only festered and grown in number over the decades. Now, it seemed their presence had been sensed, and malice had set its sights on new prey within its ancient domain. They had to leave, and leave now. But as they crashed through the undergrowth, a piercing, unearthly shriek rent the night behind them, freezing them in their tracks. Lights now dotted the hillsides in reply, as if drawn by that bone-chilling cry. They were no longer the hunters, but the hunted. And whatever stalked these woods was closing in for the kill. Sam grabbed Melissa's wrist and broke into a desperate sprint, branches tearing at their clothes as unseen pursuers gave chase. With labored breaths, they reached the truck, scrambled inside, and Sam jammed the keys into the ignition. But as the engine whined in protest, a colossal, man-like figure detached from the gloom, malice burning in its wild, inhuman eyes. It lunged without warning at the driver's side window, and Sam gunned the gas just in time. Their truck tore off into the night as unearthly howls of rage and famine chased them down the winding road, fleeing with their lives from the soulless abomination that had lurked in those cursed woods for over a century, and still remained, awaiting its next victims. Their harrowing flight through the dense forest was a blur of dodged trees and adrenaline. Sam swung the wheel wildly, aiming blindly for any sign of civilization, while strained eyes searched the surrounding blackness for pursuers. But then, with a lurching jolt, one rear wheel caught in a dug rut, launching the vehicle into a crazed spin. They careened helplessly toward an embankment before slamming to a halt against thick trunks. For a long moment, Sam and Melissa sat stunned, as silent and still as the lifeless woods enveloping their disabled vehicle. Then shuddering breaths shattered the fragile calm as danger's imminence crashed back in full force. They were stranded, lost deep in this primal forest hollow where unnatural terrors stalked, isolated from all aid or escape. A light flickered behind sepulchral trees, twin orbs hovering like malignant fireflies. Their hellish light revealed grinning maws dripping with want, hungering after so long in solitude's shadows. Melissa's shaking hand found Sam's in the darkness, gripped tight for comfort against unspoken fears. He squeezed back determinedly and, shouldering his pack, kicked open the truck door. "Run," he rasped, and they plunged into the phantom woodland once more. Spectral howls rang out in pursuit through the mist. Swaddled forest, creatures from man's deepest nightmares, giving chase. Sam yanked Melissa onward, desperately, breath heaving in lung. Burning panic. Branches whipped, cruel barbs across their flailing forms. But pain served only to fuel flight's fervor. A clearing suddenly opened ahead, feeble moonlight casting the grassy dell aglow. But within that glade's heart remained denser shadows, light unwilling or unable to pierce the darkness there. An inky void residing where none should be, an opening into nothingness itself. And floating upon that Stygian surface, a hooded shape materialized. Long fingers grasping, lipless grin oozing malice. It knew them, as it knew all who strayed too near its domain. This place was no natural part of the wood, but a rip in the veil twigged this reality, and the next where nameless old ones lurked, eager to pull back stray mortals into the abyss. It reached now for the fleeing lovers, to drag them into the night that existed outside of night. But in that moment, as relentless as their pursuit, something else erupted from the woods. A towering, burly figure wielding an aged rifle. "Carver!" the hermit bellowed, taking aim. It seemed the forester yet prowled these haunted woods, defending his accursed home from the encroaching otherness. And with his protection, Sam dragged Melissa into a final full-throttle dash for salvation's faint glow beyond the tree line. Civilization, help, an end to the terror that had stalked them through this primordial forest of twisted entities and buried secrets since first setting foot within its borders. They broke free of claustrophobic trunks into the cool night, panting with relief. Behind, an unholy shriek rose from the mist, cloaked woodland, its guardians driven once more to fester in umbrous isolation. For now, the forest's dark mystery remained safely obscured within nature's veiled depths. But its riddles were far from solved, and the valley's grim legend would persist, hiding terrors that perhaps mankind was never meant to know.